how did you get started in wilderness medicine, in all of this outdoors? What is wilderness medicine?
It's a totally good question, but it's unanswerable in my mind, because if somebody says, I want to get into wilderness medicine, well, what does that mean? Does it mean you're a climber and you want to do rescue? Imagine what it is you want to do. You picture yourself doing high altitude research. If that's true, then
Dr. Howard Donner is a high-altitude physician who is volunteering for the National Park Service to help climbers who need immediate medical attention at 14,000 feet.
He is a co-author of The Field Guide to Wilderness Medicine. He served as expedition doctor on the 1998 Nova Everest expedition, popularized by the critically acclaimed film Everest, the Death Zone.
How did you get started in all of this?
I started teaching survival classes for the national park, and then I became really interested in cold and hypothermia and frostbite and survival medicine. Find someone who's doing high altitude research or a place that does it and go intern there and do this and that. And the interesting thing in wilderness medicine is,
Welcome to the Interesting MD podcast, the show about what doctors do when we aren't seeing patients and how this can help us find balance and prevent burnout. I'm your host, Rob Beck. Welcome back to another episode of the Interesting MD podcast. So this week I have somebody on that I met last year, and he's just kind of one of these people that you feel like you just need to start a podcast so that you can spend some more time with this guy and hear some more stories from him. I met Dr. Donner last year at Wilderness Medicine Conference, where he was teaching us an advanced wilderness expedition provider, right? Is that the name of it?
something like that. I teach the course and I get it confused. Let's see. It's AWEP, which is Advanced Wilderness and Expedition Provider.
Okay, there we go. Excellent. Well, anyway, please, without further ado, I have Dr. Howard Donner here with me. Thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Of course, Rob. It's my pleasure. It was great meeting you. I remember at the course, not every student is memorable, but you have really great energy, and I'm glad to see you again.
Well, thank you very much. We were the only Canadians at the course and probably the only internist. There were a couple of trauma surgeons and things like that. Not too many internists, I imagine, take the course.
And I was very impressed. You learned how to speak American prior to coming to the course, and it was really impressive.
Well, thanks. So technically, my wife was born Canadian. I was born in the United States. We just moved to Canada about 4.5 years ago, and I did become naturalized a few months ago. But I'm bilingual now, so
That's
I get
perfect.
to speak American and Canadian.
Mhm.
So. Well, thanks again. So just getting right into it. So can you just tell me just a little bit about yourself? Like, where are you from? Where'd you go to med school?
I grew up in San Francisco. Actually, was born in San Francisco. Not too many San Franciscan natives. Grew up in California. Went to UC Davis in med school and went to residency at UC Davis. So I did internship, however, at Highland Hospital in Oakland, so-called Oakland Knife and Gun Club. But residency was back at Davis. So that is that. But I've lived in many places, including Oregon, and lived for many years in Telluride, Colorado. Now, as we speak, I'm in Truckee, California. And for people that don't know Truckee, that's where Squaw Valley, now Palisades ski area is, and sort of a central skiing area for California.
Yeah, do you guys still have snow on the ground?
Yeah, at my house, there are patches of snow. But if I just go up the hill for 5 minutes, if I drive up the hill for literally 5 minutes, ride my bike up the hill for 20 minutes, I'm in deep snow.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So I live safely at sea level, even though I'm in Canada. Don't really get that much snow, but if I have to drive a few hours, but then you get some pretty serious snow there too, but not too far from Whistler, a couple hours from Whistler.
I know you don't want to get sidetracked for your podcast, but I love your part of the world. I'm envious, and I love where I live, and not complaining, but I really am fond of British Columbia.
It's really beautiful, and there's just a little bit of everything for everyone to do, especially for an outdoor enthusiast. And so there's a lot. I'm still working on making my rounds around British Columbia, although it's gigantic. So I won't ever see all of it, but it's a really, really beautiful place.
There's something crazy, I think, about places where big mountains come right down to the ocean. And for me, I don't know, it makes me crazy when I see mountains going down into the ocean. And California has a beautiful coastline, and we have a coastal range, but it's not like yours.
Yeah, no, it's pretty much, especially if you go onto the mainland side, where if you take the ferry from Vancouver Island over into West Vancouver, when you go into the Horseshoe Bay, it
Yeah.
looks like Lord of the Rings. It
No, yeah.
is just, it's a 3,000 foot mountain going literally straight down into the ocean.
Yeah.
And it is stunningly beautiful.
I,
And it's great. Where we ski all the time, you drive along the coast, you turn left, it's 12 miles, and you get to the ski resort. There's no snow at the base, and then by 12 miles later, there's 10, 12 feet of snow. And then you get up to the top of the mountain and you see the ocean on this side, you see the ocean on this side. It's really pretty amazing.
well, when
So
this podcast goes big, you can send your Gulfstream to pick me up, and we'll do it live from your front
that's right.
porch.
Yeah, that would be, yes, we will definitely do that. Well, thanks again. I really do appreciate it. And I really do want you to come up here. This would be a pretty amazing place.
Yeah.
So when we first met, or when we met, it was during this wilderness medicine course, and you kind of had a whole lot of stories about all your adventures and everything in the outdoors, and that's why I thought that it would be really interesting to have you on at first. I've learned a lot about you since then. That there's lots of other things that we're going to get into. But how did you get started in wilderness medicine, in all of this outdoors? What is wilderness medicine for all of the city dwelling doctors out there?
I'll start with, it would be easier for me to start with a question I could answer well, but
Sure.
what is wilderness medicine? I'm still not sure. And, as we go on with this podcast, I might get into, I'll just start with it now. Why not? I teach a lot of courses. It's how I met you. And oftentimes residents, doctors that are interested in shifting gears, med students, nurses, PAs, whatever, they go, well, I want to get into wilderness medicine, and you're doing wilderness medicine. How do I get into wilderness medicine? And it's a totally good question, but it's unanswerable in my mind because of your question, which is, what is wilderness medicine? Although I have been guilty of being slightly new age during periods of my life. For example, I worked in a little trauma center in Mount Shasta for 4 years, and, got into some of the really interesting, new age stuff that was going on up there. I don't consider myself a new ageist, but I say to these people asking that it's so broad and so diffuse to think of wilderness medicine as a thing that when you say, how can I get into wilderness medicine? It diffuses any kind of intention that you might have. And so what it took me years, because people always ask me this, I want to do what you're doing. How do I get into it? And what I finally realized is, don't think of it as wilderness medicine. If you want to know what wilderness medicine is, you could look at a book like Paul Auerbach's giant tome on wilderness medicine and just look at the chapters. And there's stuff on undersea diving. There's stuff on snake bite toxicology. There's stuff on austere medicine, conflict medicine, relief medicine, hypothermia, altitude, so if somebody says, I want to get into wilderness medicine, well, what does that mean? Does it mean you're into molecular biology and you want to study snake bite antivenin? Or does it mean you're a climber and you want to do rescue and you want to work in the Tetons? Or does it mean you want to work for Médecins Sans Frontières? You want to do altitude research? What does it mean? So what I tell people that ask me that, I say, and this is the new age part of it, I guess, I say, actually imagine what it is you want to do. I mean, what do you picture yourself doing? Do you picture yourself doing high altitude research? If that's true, then find someone who's doing high altitude research or a place that does it and go pester them and go intern there and do this and that. And the interesting thing in wilderness medicine is, it seems like, it takes time to become an expert in any field, but in wilderness medicine, if you were doing altitude research for a couple of years, you would become somewhat of an expert, and you'd end up giving talks, and you'd end up being asked to write an article or a textbook chapter. And it's a good way into the field is to just imagine what you want very specifically.
And just kind of getting into it, I think, is one of those things where there's not really a fellowship program, right?
There
You
is
teach
actually
us in wilderness medicine. Okay.
there are a couple ways. Dr. Weiss, Eric Weiss, at Stanford, you met him at that meeting. He chaired the bigger national portion of that. I mean, the course you and I met at was national, but it was a field course. There's a national conference that goes. He started the first wilderness medicine fellowship at Stanford. And back in the olden days, which wasn't that long ago, that was it. And then there was another, and then another, and another. And I don't know how many there are now, but I'm making this number up, so I hope you don't get nasty grams. But I would say there's 30 or 40 programs at major universities now in wilderness medicine. And again, I like to say back in the olden days because it's funny, but back in the olden days, I knew most people that were doing stuff. And now all the time people come up to me and go, "Oh, you must know Dr. Such and such. They do wilderness medicine." And, it's a huge field now. And I don't know anybody anymore.
Nope. I have no idea who that is, but good on them.
Good on them.
So how did you get started in all of this? So if you were interested in all of this stuff prior to there being a fellowship or a national conference on this, how did you get started in it?
Well, when you and I met, I was talking to you a little bit about this, that most doctors, again, that come up to me and say, "How do I get into wilderness medicine?" I actually was into wilderness medicine as a guide, teaching survival, doing rescue, and I got really interested in medicine. And I remember as a river guide, there was always doctors on river trips for some reason, and I'd be really interested in frostbite or whatever, and I'd go, "Oh, so with frostbite, why is it that blah, 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 and how do you do this?" And they'd often go, "Oh, you sound so interested in frostbite. Are you pre-med?" And I go, "No." They go, "Oh, well, you should be. You sound so interested." So my undergraduate degree was in film and film production. And then I just became so interested in rescue and survival medicine that I thought, maybe I should, continue this. And it's a funny story, really, because I was kind of like, I went crazy and became a doctor just to learn more about wilderness medicine. So it's kind of a twist on, I guess, what most people are doing now.
Yeah, you're probably doing it differently than most people who are listening to this right now. That's for sure. So you worked as a river guide, and did you do ski patrols, search and rescue, mountain search and rescue?
I did mountain search and rescue. For example, before med school, I worked at Lassen Park, doing rescue just for a season there, but they had a ski school, and I started teaching Nordic skiing and backcountry skiing. And then I thought, we're teaching people how to ski out into the backcountry, but we're not really teaching them how to survive if they get stuck. If in those days skis broke more easily because we skied on wooden Nordic skis and stuff. And I always thought, wow, people could really get stuck out here, obviously injury, etc. I started teaching survival classes for the national park. And then that's where I became really interested in cold and hypothermia and frostbite and survival medicine.
Okay. And so then you go to med school, and what next? What after that?
Well, you say I go to med school. I didn't go to med school. And I know people embellish stories. I embellish stories sometimes. So I have to always tell people when I'm not lying. But this is honest to God truth. My pre-med advisor brought me into his office and said, I just need to have a talk with you. You will never get into medical school. I mean, quite frankly, you will never get into medical school. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, number one, you're going to Chico State. And I loved Chico, but it's not, an academic powerhouse of a university. Right. And it's a California State College, State University. And he said, you're studying film and your grades are mediocre, and there's just no way you're going to get into medical school. So I think I kind of attribute that advisor to my getting into medical school, because I don't like people telling me I can't do something. And I not only got in, but I got in at a lot of schools. Somebody thought that I was, in those days. Nowadays, I don't feel like I'm unique because I talk to med students now and they're into all sorts of extreme sports and this and that. And, um, but in my day, when I was doing this, I was kind of a freak, most of the people getting into med school when I got in were, sitting in the front row of their chemistry classes. And
Yeah.
I was out rescuing people and guiding. And I think I got into a bunch of places and I think they just thought I was different.
That's a good story. It's just a great story. And you make a good doctor, right? That, you've got a
Oh,
little bit of experience, right?
yeah. It's funny you say that because I know we're going to talk about flying in a minute. Sometimes people tease me about being a doctor and a professional pilot, and they go, I've heard doctors are scary and, they kill themselves and all this. And I think it depends on the type of doctor. And I think if you're a doctor that, suddenly you find yourself with a lot of money and needing to get from point A to point B, and you figure flying's the way to do it, and you're not really that interested in aviation, and you get a pilot's license and buy a plane that's a little more than you can handle because you have the money, maybe that's dangerous for some. But I never felt like that kind of doctor because I've seen a lot of people sadly come to harm in the wilderness. I know how dangerous the natural world is, and I'm not naive to risk, and
Yeah.
I take it pretty seriously.
Yeah. We've heard some stories that you've seen some really bad things very up close
Yeah.
and out in the wilderness. And that was actually one of the things that prompted me to want to take this wilderness medicine course. Wasn't because I, see myself as a high altitude researcher. Again, I don't really like cold all that much, where I don't want to like be in it all the time, even though I live in Canada. But it was just as part of my job, I was driving back and forth and saw a man who had been hit by a car. He was riding a
Mhm.
bike and he was hit by a car, and just massive polytrauma. I pull over. I don't know. I'm a doctor. And you get out of the car and you realize I'm an internist on the side of a highway, and I know nothing about this. I didn't really know how to evaluate him. I mean, like, he was breathing, so I didn't need to do CPR, right? And I mean, that wasn't going to be very helpful anyway. But
Right.
he had a huge head laceration. He was unconscious. He had a major fracture. I mean, just a complete compound fracture of his right humerus. But you can't tell. I wasn't really all that great about being able to determine, did he have a broken, a pneumothorax or a broken pelvis, or what was going on with the rest of his legs, and just kind of doing that survey. And I really felt very vulnerable and felt really useless. And so I started talking to my wife, and I was like, hey, I just want to learn a little bit more about how to handle some of these situations and approach it a little bit more, eh, you know, systematically, and, at least be able to do something. I'm not going to be a trauma surgeon. I'm not going to be an emergency room doctor, but at least can I stabilize somebody and maybe learn one or two cool things along the way. And, that's what I got out of that. And that's exactly why I wanted to go into it. And,
Yeah.
just,
Well, you're describing, I don't want this to sound like an infomercial, but I'll say that Cheryl, who you met, I was the co-instructor, and I realized that at these conferences, you learn a lot about altitude and snake bite and lightning injury and things that you might or might not see, and they're very interesting. I mean, I find those lectures intriguing, but people would come away from these conferences going, "Yeah, I mean, I know how to treat a snake bite, but how do I take care of somebody in the wilderness?" So
right.
that's what that course you took was designed for, is how do you how do you take care of people?
So, just as an aside here, after we took that course, I am an internist that is procedure averse and all of those things. That's just not really what I enjoy doing. I'm a thinker and a talker, not a doer. But you were teaching us about reducing shoulder dislocations, and so 2 months later, after we get back from the course, one of my sons, we were at my son's rugby game, and one of his friends gets tackled in the try zone and dislocates his shoulder. And I was like, oh, I know how to do this. I know. And so I was like, yes, I'm going to do this. I remember exactly what Donner told us to do. And then I was like, okay, did a little bit of an evaluation. And literally from the rugby field where they are, you can see the trauma hospital, like you can see the hospital.
Oh, you didn't put
And
it in?
so I was like, yeah, just go.
Oh, I
I'm
thought,
embarrassed telling you this, but I was like, no, I know exactly how to do this. But it is literally 3 blocks. I was looking at his shoulder and looking at the hospital.
I get it.
And I was like, yeah, I don't know this. If we were in a different, more rural, there are definitely some more rural rugby pitches out here. And if we were at one of those, I would have gone for it. But literally three blocks from the hospital, I was like, yeah, you probably should just go over there. And I totally chickened out.
Well, I hope that somebody's injured on your next trip. No.
Yeah. Oh, it definitely will be.
I'm joking.
It's mostly broken noses and broken collarbones is what we've gotten so far. So I'm pretty useless with those. So you talked about flying. When did you get into flying? Was that before school or?
No, I mean, interestingly, I haven't thought about this in a while. I've always liked things that fly. I mean, I remember my mom when I was little, she knew that my birthdays were easy because if she got me a kite or a glider or literally anything that flew, I would go crazy. When I became a resident, I tried to learn how to fly. I kept running out of time and or money. So I just kept taking lessons, but I really didn't get anywhere. It wasn't until I started working in Telluride that this is a funny story, actually. We had a director that came in at Telluride. She looked at what we were getting paid and she said, you do understand that carpenters in this town make more money than you do. You know that, right? And we're like, well, it's just kind of what it is. So she doubled our salary. And I don't need a lot of money because I'm usually traveling on somebody else's dime anyway. And, most of my free time is spent in the backcountry. And suddenly I looked at my bank account and it was crazy because I'd never had money in the bank. And suddenly there was just this wad of money. And my hair was beginning to turn gray. And I thought, well, I have money and my hair's turned gray. And I've always thought I was going to be a pilot. So now or never. And then I became a pilot in Telluride and realized very quickly that I couldn't afford it. Even as a doctor, flying's really expensive. I thought, well, if I'm going to fly, I'm going to need to figure out a way to fly professionally and get paid to fly. So I continued getting certificates and additional licensing to allow me to fly bigger planes as a commercial pilot and instrument pilot. And I was hired by 3 different very small charter airlines to fly right seat, meaning co-pilot. It was funny because I was working half-time, maybe not half-time, but I was working a lot as a co-pilot. And there would be times where I would go to the airport and I would just walk up to people and I'd go, hi, I'm Howard Donner. I'll be one of your pilots today. And they'd go, aren't you Dr. Donner? Didn't we see you in the emergency room yesterday? And I go, that was my brother. It was kind of funny. I was living 2 lives for a while there.
Oh, that's okay too.
Yeah. And then when I came to Truckee, there's no charter airlines here. There are really small charters here, but I realized that the only way that I could continue my habit of aviation was by becoming an instructor. And I love to fly and I love to teach. So it was a natural evolution for me. And I'm doing that a lot right now.
That's fantastic. You actually gave a great talk at the Wilderness Medicine Conference about what to do in an airplane.
Oh, yeah.
And, just those really interesting and practical things of, hey, here's what you have when you're at, 39,000 feet. You have this in your kit and this is what you've got. And here's what you need to know. And it was a really, really fascinating talk. So what kind of planes did you use to fly?
Just small ones. In Telluride, I flew, I don't know if this will mean anything to you or your listeners, but I flew a King Air B200, which is a twin turboprop. And I flew something called Turbo Commander, another twin turboprop. And then another one that nobody's heard of called a Merlin, which is like a chopped down version of a plane that some people may remember called a Metroliner.
Okay.
But now I'm flying typically smaller planes. I'm training people in smaller planes, Cessnas and Pipers and things like that.
Yeah. Now, you sent me a picture that we'll definitely put up here
Yeah.
of you with a plane last week. What kind of plane is that? Is that a tail dragger? Is that what they call a tail dragger?
That is a tail dragger. Good eye.
Okay.
And that's something called a Kit Fox. And actually, I was training in that day. And there's a pilot here, Fred Williams, who is a famous backcountry pilot. And he was giving me additional training. I teach a lot of mountain flying classes, but not in little tiny tail draggers like that. So he was teaching me some of the nuances of, in that case, we were landing on a dry lake bed, as you probably know.
Yeah, that's okay. So you have one of those up there on the mountains, or is that a little at lower elevation, or where was that lake bed?
That lake bed is it's a beautiful romantic name. It's called Dead Cow. And it's south of where the playa is, where Burning Man happens, just west of Pyramid Lake. And there are these huge alkaline lake beds like that, just like Burning Man. Some of them are private property, but that one is largely BLM. So you just land. Yeah.
So if you want to take a romantic trip to Dead Cow, now you know where it is.
Yeah.
Just take your plane. You'll be able to land there, no problem. With the proper training. With that, I had read somewhere that you work for NASA. So to take your flight from 30,000 feet to 300,000 feet, or more, 300 kilometers. So how did you get into that? What were you doing with NASA?
I've always been interested in space. I'm interested in aviation, and
hence the space shuttle over your left shoulder there.
Oh yeah, that was given to me by the last human to touch Hubble, the guy that ran the Hubble program and fixed it twice, John Grunsfeld, who was a good friend. I haven't seen him in a long time. You're making me think about him. John, if you're watching this. No.
That's right, John. If you're watching, reach out.
We had a month of residency that was completely elective, 1 month. And being stupid, I called NASA, literally cold called them. Somehow I got the number of the chief flight surgeon, a guy named Richard Jennings at the time. And I remember literally calling him, no mail, no email, just calling him. Like, hello, Richard Jennings. And he was the chief flight surgeon at NASA for shuttle. And I said, hi, I'm Howard Donner. I'm a resident. I would like to come work there. And he's like, what? We don't do that. And I'm like, please. And he's like, we don't do that. Are you an aeromedicine? Are you a aeromedical resident? And I said, no. And as you may know, Rob, I don't know, there are two big aeromedical residencies in the country. And there's a big one in Houston, in Galveston, Texas, next to Houston. And that's where all the flight surgeons kind of come out of typically. So I think I called him again because I'm obnoxious. And I said, hey, just any chance you've thought of anything? And he's like, no, we don't take residents. And I said, okay. But I think I sounded pathetic. And at one point he wrote me or called me back or something. I can't remember exactly. But he said, I talked to a colleague, Joey Boyce, who was then the medical operations lead for the then ISS, International Space Station, when they were starting to build that. And Boyce called me and said, I hear you're a pathetic resident who's begging to come to NASA. And I said, yeah, you don't have to pay me anything.
You heard correctly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I said, I just want to go there and work. So I went there for a month and they gave me some projects to work on and they liked me. And I stayed on, not full time, but just as a consultant, so-called medical operations consultant, and helped to actually design. And by design, I don't want to overplay what I did, but I helped them determine the contents of the medical system for space station and help them to revise some of the medical contents of the shuttle kit.
Talking about what are the supplies that you need to take with you to the International Space Station to handle the emergencies that you're
right.
Have.
And I don't mind saying this. I have suffered from imposter syndrome my whole life. And I talked about walking up to people saying, hey, I'm Howard, I'll be your pilot today. And they go, oh, Great. How's the weather looking? And I'm always thinking, well, I don't think this anymore. But, for the first year or two, I was thinking, man, I can't believe these people trust me. I don't know what I'm doing. That feeling.
Right.
And I had that with being a doctor, and I've had that many times. And when I worked at NASA, it was the same. I would always just think, man, there's all these brainiacs that are all aerospace people, and why are they listening to me? But I was their so-called wilderness medicine consultant, and giving myself maybe some due benefit from my work there. I do believe coming from the austere environments that I came from is different than being a battalion medic or medical officer in the military, where you have Humvees and you have trucks and you have airplanes, and you have much more infrastructure. So there were times where I'd go, you might not need all of this. You might be able to do it with less, because I'm used to carrying stuff often on my back, or at least on other people's backs. Yeah. And you have to minimize your supplies.
It's $10,000 a pound to get it into space, right?
Right.
Something like that.
Right. And on expeditions, it's the same. I always say you can't carry a hospital formulary into the backcountry. You have to make a decision about what you bring.
So how long were you with NASA? Are you still
on it? No. On and off for about 5 years. And then when I stopped doing clinical medicine, I stopped working there. I just felt like, I still teach medicine, as you know, but
yeah,
I felt like, I didn't feel as, cutting edge as I was once.
Right. Okay. And so where did you go after that? I know that you have filmmaking in your background. You have a degree in filmmaking.
Yeah.
So how did that come back into your life, or did it ever leave?
No, it left, fully left. Okay. I made some films in college that I'm sure if we watched them now, they'd be laughable, but for their time, I was considered, successful as a film student, and entered a few small film festivals in those days, and my films did okay, but this is really small time. Somebody said to me once, the only thing worse than not getting credit for something you've done is getting credit for something you haven't done. These were small films in small festivals. Yeah. And then when I went to started pre-med and med school, I just left it behind. So I was asked to be involved with 2 Novas for public broadcasting, PBS Nova, one on Everest.
At 5:30 in the morning and 300 feet below the summit, David calls down to Howard.
We've been climbing like crazy. We're on the south summit, 28,700 feet.
It's unbelievable. And you climb in the middle of the night and you're standing up there in the early morning.
They have only 300 vertical feet to go, but 2 hours of climbing. Sangbu raises the Tibetan flag on the summit. David is sitting on the top. Ed is taking the last steps up with Carter just...
Base camp. This is David. Do you read me?
David, we read you loud and clear. Where are you? Over.
Howard, I'm on top of the world. We made it.
In the safety of his tent, David reveals to Howard that he had a difficult climb to the summit.
Howard, this is South Cole.
Hey, David, this is Howard. Go ahead.
This morning I drank about a quart of Kool-Aid. Then I stopped and I threw up about 6 times. I thought I would have to come down, but I didn't want to leave the team behind because it was just, I kept thinking I'd feel better. I had the worst trip down in the South Summit I've ever had. Over.
We gotta get these guys out of here. He's a little sick.
David Carter's condition has worsened. Despite his own illness, David Brashears picks up the camera to shoot Ed taking care of Carter.
I think the best option, if he can handle it, is to get him down to Camp 2. The lower we get him, the better. He'd have to catch his breath. He'd have to take his mask off. He was overheating, desperately trying to gain control of his breathing. I thought we could get to Camp 2, but as it turned out, it took us a long time. It took 4.5 hours to get down to Camp 3.
Carter gains enough strength to get on the radio.
Carter, my man, how you doing?
I'm still alive. day.
Tell me, this is very important, Carter. I need to get a feeling for whether you feel like your lungs are full of fluid, do you feel like it's difficult to get air, you feel really short of breath, or do you feel more like it's wheezy in your upper airway, like you have asthma? Over.
I really don't feel like I have anything in my lungs. It feels like my throat is closed up on me. Or I have asthma, something like that. Last night, I coughed up a lot of green, hard chunks. A couple of them had blood. Over.
Carter seems to be improving. But 2 hours later, a desperate call from Ed.
What's going on, Ed?
David's tired, like his throat obstructed.
Ed, I'm going to keep talking. You don't have to respond. See if you can do a Heimlich and get him to expel whatever's obstructing. Over. Okay, Ed, listen to me. I'm not sure where you're at. If it's an obvious obstruction, you can push it out with a Heimlich, do that. If it just seems like Carter's airway is closing and you need to breathe for him, go ahead and start mouth-to-mouth ventilation. Over.
Okay, hang on, I did. I have a dozen Heimlichs and it seemed to help.
Tell me what Carter's doing now. What is his respiratory status? Over.
He's sitting up. We did some more Heimlichs. It seems like he's calming down a little bit. Hang on.
Okay, what's very important, Carter, for you is I want you to take nice, easy, slow, deep breaths. Breathing quickly right now won't help you, Carter, and I know this is really scary. You're going to do fine, but I need you to breathe deep, in and out, and in and out, slowly. And know that Ed and the rest of us are going to take care of you. Over.
David was desperately gasping for air. I wasn't sure he was going to make it through the night. I mean, he had his doubts, and it's a scary situation to be up there all alone, thinking that, here this guy might die on you.
It was an earlier time when Everest was not what it is now. But
so
anyway,
what year was this? Sorry to
this was after Krakauer's book. In
okay, so after 96 or whatever it was.
And okay, I'll set it up for you. I'll tee it up. So Krakauer writes this book, Into Thin Air, and there's this huge debacle in, I guess, 96. And all of these people die. And Krakauer's book was largely about, not entirely, but largely about the psychosocial aspects of climbing Everest and who, personalities.
Should we be doing it, and who should be doing it? Who should be allowed?
Yeah, and just some of the strong personalities and whether they belonged up there. So a lot of the people that were involved that year, they were making an IMAX up there, and that's a great film. That IMAX is really beautiful, and was directed by David Brashears, and the climbers were Ed Viesters, and one of the cameramen was Pete Athens, and those guys wanted to go back and make a movie about the medical side of it. What really happens to people up there, and why were so many mistakes made, and why do people get stupid at altitude? And so somehow, I don't even understand fully the origins of the film, but Nova PBS wanted to make a film about that with the same players from the IMAX film. So I went up and worked on that film, and it was sort of a light investigation of mountain sickness and cognitive function at high altitude.
How high up did you go?
I only went on that just up into the lower Khumbu. I didn't even have a climbing permit. That's another story about me that I don't love telling, but I will, is I suck at altitude. I was a climber and physician on the first American ascent of Kanchenjunga. And at that time, I was doing some light mountain guiding. I was guiding up on Mount Shasta, for example, on the north side, getting pretty good. I was never a great climber, but I was in great shape, and I was pretty good climber and was climbing peaks in the Cascades like Hood and Baker on harder routes.
Yeah.
And I had a name in wilderness medicine, so I was asked to be the doctor on the first American ascent of Kanchenjunga, which is the third highest peak in the world. And everyone's heard of Everest, and most people have heard of K2, but Kanchenjunga is 3. I went as a climber, but returned. You know that movie, The Right Stuff? I was the wrong stuff. I mean, above about 20,000 feet, I just could not keep up. and I don't do well at extreme altitude.
Hmm.
And I just really slow down, and headaches and the whole sort of constellation of symptoms. I just am really susceptible. So I realized on that climb, I mean, they were nice enough to tell me I could climb as high as I wanted, and including up to the summit. But I realized that my career was not going to be in high altitude mountaineering.
Yeah. Well, Andrew and I, when we went to Big Sky to the conference, that we realized like how, I mean, my head right now is about 6 feet above sea level. And that was a big change. And we felt terrible for a couple of days. And we didn't realize that was altitude. I was like, my God, I just had 2 beers last night. Why am I really feeling terrible? And we figured out that after a couple of days we acclimatized and it was okay, but realized that that's probably high altitude mountaineering is not in my future either.
This is a story I don't think I've ever told anywhere publicly, but Peter Hackett is considered by most to be the world's, not the national, but the world's expert on high altitude illness. And he was at my house once in Telluride, and my house was at 10,000 feet. And I remember he goes, I don't feel that good. And I go, really? And he was coming up from Grand Junction, which, I don't know, I think Grand Junction's about like Denver, maybe 5 or 6. And he's up at 10, and he's like, I don't feel that good. And I said, Hackett, you have altitude illness. He goes, no, I don't. I think I'm pre-viral or something. I just don't feel right. It's not altitude. But it was altitude illness. And I was thinking, that always seemed like such irony. Here is the world's expert on mountain sickness in my living room denying that he has altitude illness.
That sounds about right. I mean, we all are like, no, that doesn't happen to me. That happens to other people. That definitely happens
Exactly.
to other people. So just going back real quick to Mount Baker, we can actually see Mount Baker literally from our house. So that is my favorite thing about living in Victoria, is just on these days we go out to the beach and I can see a very cold beach, but I can see Mount Baker. It is absolutely amazing.
It's funny. Sorry.
My favorite. No. That's just my favorite part.
Yeah. And that mountain is not that high. I think it's 10,000 feet. And it is so beautiful. And the approach into Climb Baker was, I think, the most beautiful approach I've ever done. I just remember wildflowers up to my eyeballs, literally.
I've never made it up there. We didn't go up there. We haven't skied there or anything like that. But it is absolutely my favorite part of living here, that just wherever you are, you just all of a sudden you're like, oh, there it is again. And you just go around the corner and you're like, oh, there it is again. It's this huge, beautiful thing. All right. So you work with Nova. You do 2 films with them, you said?
Oh, yeah. So I did these 2 films. Thank you. I had no idea where I was last.
Yeah, sorry. That was
no, it's good. It's always a better conversation when you get lost in it rather than tracking any thought, at least in my world. I thought so much has gone on since I studied film. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. And, now there's CGI and fancy nonlinear video editing, digital video editing, and all this stuff I didn't learn in school. I was literally cutting film. So I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm out of it, and there's no way I could ever make films again. And when I made these Novas, I thought, well, here's PBS Nova, and it's still a camera, and it's still the same techniques, You set up shots and you interview people and you get B-roll and this and that. And I thought, maybe not that much has changed. I mean, there's technology change, but long story short, I lived in Telluride at the time. There's a thing called Mountain Film there. It's a really big mountain film festival, kind of like the one that you guys have in Banff. And I didn't know how to cut film on modern equipment. So I made intro videos for mountain film. I got to use the editing suite at the local TV station, and they sort of taught me how to cut film. And I learned a lot on my own. For 2 or 3 years, I cut videos, intros for the film festival. And at the end of those 3 years, I thought, well, I think I know how to direct still. And I worked on those Novas and saw that it's not magic. It's just good old fashioned film technique combined with, now I understand how to cut film. So I started directing films again, and made about a film a year for about 5 years. And some were good and some were not so good, but they did okay, and went around on film festival circuits and won a few small awards and such.
That's pretty fantastic. You're just kind of following wherever you go. And, that's kind of one of the interesting things about you is that you have done a lot of things. You've not been afraid to try some stuff. You feel like, okay, yeah, I'm an imposter, but I'm still going to do it. You haven't been afraid to ask. And that's one of the things that I want people to get out of this podcast is that medicine is very, very intense. This is geared mostly at doctors. And now my son's going to be like, yeah, my boys are going to be like, yeah, now I want to be a pilot again. This is like the third time that they've heard a doctor talk about being a pilot. So, but I want people to take a step back from the daily life and the daily, just the pressure, the stress from being a doctor, the day in, the day out of patient care and dealing with the healthcare systems and everything else that goes along with it, and try something new, learn something new, use our type A personalities because we are all type A's. We're just different brands of type A, and learn how to go out and just try something.
Yeah.
And realize that you might fail, but do you have any advice on how you've been able to get out there and do this and overcome the imposter syndrome?
Well, a couple things. One thing is, and I hope this isn't a downer at all, but I've had, now that my hair's fully gray, people assume I'm retired, but there was a time when I was not this gray, and people would come up to me at conferences because I'd show slides from this expedition and this river trip and this and that. And doctors would sometimes come up to me, with the folded arms, which I always think is kind of, hey, so how is it that you get to gallivant around the world? I actually, by I mean the doctor asking me, I actually have a job and I have to support my family and I have to pay the bills and I can't be gallivanting around the world and I can't go to Kanchenjunga for base camp for 3 months. So I would say to them, and this is the part I hope it's not too provocative, but I would say, so what kind of car do you drive? And they'd go, what does that have to do with this? And I'd go, no, I'm just asking, what kind of car do you drive? Well, I've got a BMW. And your other car? Well, it's a Mercedes. And how many homes do you have? I'm just curious. And I wouldn't be snarky. I'd just go, well, how many homes do you own? They go, well, 2. I've got this, and we've got another house up in the mountains, and I'd go, okay, and that's cool. And I'm envious of some of the things that you have, but understand that until a month ago, I'm speaking real time now. I was driving a 20-year-old Suzuki. This house that I'm in, I rent. I'm not proud of that, but I'm just saying there are trade-offs. And really, what I'm saying,
choice.
Yeah, and really, what I'm saying is, I'm not telling your listeners they should drive an old car and rent their house, but I'm just saying, sometimes, and this is the point I'm trying to make, there sometimes are trade-offs, and you can't, maybe some people can have everything. In my life, I have realized I can't have everything. So you have to trade off. And if you say, no, I want this and I want that and I want this and I want to have the fancy cars, the fancy home, the fancy vacations, the fancy everything, I definitely have to eat out 3 times a week and drink fine wines, then maybe you can't be on an expedition for 3 months. But if you don't care, then maybe you can. And the bottom line is, maybe you don't need all you think you need.
And you feel like when you go into these things, when you have gone into your new adventures and everything else, are you pretty much okay with failing if it's something that didn't work out for you?
I mean, I fail all the time, and I'm always putting together projects, and there are always misfires. Yeah, I guess that would be the other. I mean, there are a lot of points to be made here, but one of those is, if you're absolutely mortified about failure, it's hard to get things off the ground. You have to know that you can fail. I could, offer a bunch of quotes and blather from the past, but I won't. I'll just say that failure is part of this kind of thing. And I guess the fear of, not fear, but sometimes you have to reinvent yourself. And I don't mean to say you have to. I don't mean that. Some people don't need to reinvent themselves. Yeah. And I promise I am a judgy person, but in this case, I am not judging. If you decide you love your practice and you love seeing patients, 5 or more days a week, and you're fulfilled and happy, good on you. And I mean that. But if you're somebody that gets restless, sometimes you have to reinvent yourself. And I think of life sometimes like what metaphor, like chapters in a book or acts in a play. And it's okay to change it up and to have another, the act ends and now there's a new act. And some people really fear that because there's change.
Yeah. I find that doctors oftentimes don't fail, right? Like most doctors don't fail. And one of the things that I want people to really understand is that, my God, if you're a doctor and you want to try something new and you want to do something new and you fail, you're still a doctor.
Oh yeah.
Like, that's not a bad consolation prize, right? Like that's say it turns out that you are never going to climb the 7 summits, or you're not going to get all 14 of the world's 8,000 peaks. Like, you'll still be a doctor and that'll be okay.
I'll tell you a funny story that I've never told in any context like this, but when you say you're still a doctor, when I lecture, you may have noticed I try to be funny. No, this is the last thing I'll say is just that, and sometimes my humor doesn't work, and I'll be speaking to a crowd and nobody's laughing at my jokes, and then I just go back to being a doctor, and I think about how hard it would be to be a comedian, because for a comedian, if you're falling flat on your audience, what do you go back to? And for me, if I'm falling flat and I'm trying to make people laugh and they're just staring at me, then I just go, okay, I'll tell them about high altitude pulmonary edema and they'll be happy enough. But what does a comedian do?
Right. Yeah. We're very fortunate that we're able to just kind of fall back on just being a doctor.
Yeah.
I won't be able to climb Everest until I'm rid of this guy. That's for sure.
What kind of dog is it? Because I can't see him.
Oh, okay. He's a Vizsla.
Vizsla.
They're supposed to be like really active dogs. They're kind of look like a small Weimaraner or something like that. But he's the laziest of the breed, I think. He's very happy to sit here. I really can't tell you how much I appreciate this. And I'm going to see if I can get rid of him. But thank you so much.
Yeah,
I really do appreciate it. And I hope that somebody can put in a plug, if you wanted to plug anything, or like the wilderness medicine conferences, or, whatever. It doesn't matter to me, like whatever you do.
Sure. I'd love to. Yeah. We're not recording. I don't profit from any of these courses, but I love it when people come. So I'm happy to plug them.
Well, no, I would say that, how do people, if they do want to get into something new, try something new, what is your advice on it?
That's a hard one. I mean, there's lots of courses, and as you know, Rob, I'm involved in some of those. But I would say it just depends. For people that just want a taste of wilderness medicine, sort of a hands-on experience, the thing that most people would have access to is their local search and rescue. And so if you want to get your hands dirty, typically sheriff's departments have some form of volunteer search and rescue. And that is always a great place to, start learning about just taking care of injuries and going on searches. And I worked on many search and rescue teams, and they're great groups of people. As far as classes go, I teach a lot of wilderness medicine. If you're a doctor type or medical type, as most and many of your listeners are, there are these national courses that we teach. And if you just go to wilderness-medicine.com, wilderness-medicine, or if you just do a Google search for wilderness medicine, it'll kind of pops to the surface. But we run courses all over the world, adventure courses. I'm doing one on the river in a few weeks, up on the Klamath River, which is a little closer to you, Rob, Northern California. And national conferences, I'm going to one in Santa Fe literally next week, one in Snowbird this summer, one in Big Sky in the winter, and on and on and on. And they're easy to find if you just Google wilderness medicine, Big Sky, Santa Fe, this and that. And if you want to learn how to fly or mountain fly, come to Truckee. Talk to Rob about getting in touch with me.
Absolutely.
And Rob, don't ever tell anybody to email me, because I am very irresponsible with email. Just give them my phone number or have them text me.
You will just get Howard Donner's cell phone.
Good.
And that's the way to get in touch with him, because who knows where in the world he's going to be.
Exactly.
Actually. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for taking all the time and coming on. I really hope that everybody gets a sense of how much fun it is to be around you and how interesting you are, and that there really are a lot of opportunities out there for everybody. So
that's
you
great.
very much.
Thanks, Rob. And lastly, this is not a platitude. I hope I see you again. So if you're ever in the Sierras, definitely show up, and you'll be treated like a VIP.
Well, thank you very much. Likewise, if you ever find yourself in British Columbia, let me know.
Yeah, I might make it happen just because of that offer.
All right.
All right.
More than happy to.
Okay, we'll talk soon, Rob. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to another episode of the InterestingMD podcast. Please check out my content on YouTube at InterestingMD and follow me on TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at The InterestingMD and on X at InterestingMD. If you have comments or questions and want to get in touch with me or any of my guests, please DM me on socials or email me at rob@interestingmd.com. If you have any ideas for a show and you want to share your hobbies with me or don't know where to get started on your own project, you can email ideas@interestingmd.com. Please like and subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel to get the latest content. Much appreciation to Falter Media for editing, producing, and posting all InterestingMD content. Check them out, because if they can do this for me, imagine what they can do for you. See you next week.